give us some tips on interviews. A lot of people really want to know about it. I've been asked about it a lot. And then the other thing is, like many filmmakers, I have a day job. I actually have 2 day jobs. And I do freelance transcription, which means I listen to a lot of raw interviews, like a lot. And everything from official U.S. Department investigations to PBS behind the scenes on Downton Abbey. So I've listened to so many good and bad interviews that I've started to have like a lot of opinions on it. So I thought, maybe first off thing to start with is there's actually not just one type of interview. I kind of did like a little rough taxonomy of different kinds of interviews. And obviously this is rough and you guys can jump in. So first, basic, what we're all probably used to and what a lot of podcast projects probably do is just your simple Q&A. You're asking, you've got a guest who's coming on to promote a specific thing. You want them to talk about that or their life or a particular topic. The interviewer is not too prominent and that kind of thing. You also have, on the same vein, what I'm calling the important interviewer, which is where you have an interviewer who's also a celebrity or who is also an expert, and they're putting in just as much of their life and their experience as the subject. So it's sort of a 50-50 give and take. And then you also have answers-only interviews, which is what I do for documentary, which is the person who's sitting behind the camera asking the questions, you never see, you never hear, it's like they don't exist. And those have some very special challenges with them. And then there is also the man on the street interview, which is where you go up to somebody, you have no prep, you have no research, like you're just like, what do you think about Doctor Who?
Who would win in a dick fight between Kirk and Picard? Go.
Yeah, exactly. And so those also have their own sort of challenges. So that's sort of the different types of interviews, just to give us sort of a reference point. But I guess the big thing I want to know is, what do you guys want to know? So does anybody have a project you're working on, a specific thing that you're wanting to tackle that we could help with? I also have notes that I can go back to.
And we're done.
Yeah. So you don't seem to understand how the interview process works. This is the answer portion.
Exactly.
We didn't explain it properly.
No, okay.
Yeah.
So that's when we ask you questions and you go, splat.
Well,
Here's something I could throw out too, is that, are you attending this because you're actually interested in conducting interviews yourself? You're doing that where you're the interviewer. So you're looking for how to approach that kind of thing. How do you properly interview? Yeah.
Okay, so with my podcast, one of the things that I'm trying to open into, we haven't traditionally had guests on my other podcast as so much as like I need to know something from you. We have guests in the way of there's the 2 hosts, and then we'll have a not random person, but somebody
like a third chair.
A third
Yeah.
chair that constantly rotates. You come on the show, we talk about an episode, and you join in like you're one of the 3.
Sure.
With my other podcast, though, I'm trying to expand into, hey, you're Dwight Schultz, star of the A-Team. What's the next big project? But I don't want it to turn into, let me ask you the same 3 questions that 50 other people have just asked you, and you're ready to shoot yourself if you ever have to answer it again.
Yeah.
Right. That's actually one of the things on my list, is that unless you're doing a documentary, don't ask a question that you can find the answer on Google. If you're doing a documentary, there is actually an awful lot of asking questions you already know the answers to, because you need to have it on film and you need to have them saying it in your movie. But in general, like, you don't want to ask him, like, what part did you play on the A-Team? What years did that run?
Yeah.
Like that. And so that's where, like, the number one thing on my list of stuff to touch on is research. Go back and listen to other interviews he's done, especially if you can find recent ones. I was actually a subject Wednesday for an interview for somebody on a podcast that was interviewing me, and we had exchanged a couple really short emails beforehand. But then when we started talking, she would just throw in things like, well, I know that you went to school at American University. And I was like, I never told you that. And I'm like, I know it's on my website, but, so it really showed that she had done her background research.
So be a stalker.
Yeah,
You know what? If you're doing, like, anybody who's done TV and film, and you have no Wikipedia and IMDb, if you only got 20 minutes, Wikipedia and IMDb
right.
I remember when, and I assume he's not watching. I remember when we got William Catt, the Greatest American Hero, on Trek. We found out that we were going to do it, and then he was delayed, and so I didn't do any prep because I knew we had some time. And then our contact with him was like, "Hey, he's got like an hour in like 20 minutes."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh." So we
Suddenly.
like we had to get in. So Wikipedia and Google is where we started. For me, I start from the like. Everybody loves to talk about themselves. Like I told my life story 100 times, but if you ask me about my life story, I will sit here and tell you my life story and enjoy doing it. So I always like to take people back. I would go like, where'd you start? Who were you? And that's always kind of like where I just want to know what it was like. That's I guess what my thing that I want to do is I want to go, put us there. Like not I'm from Wisconsin. It was like, what's it like living in Wisconsin when you want to be an actor? I mean, what's that like? That's I'm always trying to get, at least for me, that's the angle I'm always trying to get is what, if I was your friend, what would I be seeing at the time?
It's also worth noting that sometimes it depends on what kind of show you're doing and what kind of topics you're covering, but very often it seems like some of the most entertaining interviews result from just having a nice, comfortable conversation with the person. I mean, it's just that simple. You can do research, you can know there are things you want to hit, but ultimately, if you're having a fun conversation with someone and you're laughing, and you have some jokes between the two of you, you bring up something, they bring up something, everyone listening will be enjoying that. And as long as you also hit, like say you have an actor on, they want to promote whatever film's airing next week, or as long as you hit that, but the rest of it should be fun. And one thing I've also started to do more often that has proven to be very useful, and I don't mean this as cold and calculating as it may come across, because it's pleasant to do most of the time anyway, but it's a great strategy, and this happened a few times already, where we had an actor, a director, somebody on, and yes, the stuff they already do and what people want to hear, but I go looking for, do they have a charity? Are they, what are they actually passionate about?
Right.
And then in one case, the first question I asked was, why don't you take a few minutes and tell us about this project you're working on for, food and whatever. And he was so overjoyed to talk about that we could have had him for 2 hours after that. He would talk about anything. And the floodgates were open, including stuff like, don't ask him the same questions again. Yeah, but if you want to take him on a tour through the old stuff that other people might want to hear, they're ready because they know they got the forum to talk about something they really deeply care about. That is a fantastic way to make sure you get that comfortable conversation with someone.
So it's almost like being a good first date.
Yes.
Especially if it's with someone that you're interviewing for because they're notable for something. Like somebody who's accustomed to being interviewed. For me, I sort of keep a mental list of what are the questions that either the fans of our show or the people who we've interviewed have told us have worked. So one of my go-to that has always spawned a great conversation, because I talk to a lot of geek personalities and that sort of thing when I do talk to people is, okay, you're used to people coming up to your table and signing stuff and seeing a throng of fans in front of you. Who's that for you, right? Like, who do you like?
Yeah.
Like when you see them, you go, the way that your fans come up to you and go, I can't believe we were getting to meet you. Who's that for you if you saw that you would like start sweating about?
And it makes them the geek and the fan, and it makes them more human.
Yeah, and that's,
my friend Kevin has a podcast called Picture Lock that's all about film, and he interviews people who make film, people who are in films, people who review them, and it's a wide gamut. And he always starts, and he always says, I start every interview with, which, sometimes can be awkward, but he's really charming, so it works for me. But he's like, my first question is always, what made you fall in love with film?
Yeah.
And that always, and I appeared on his show one time, and it was like, oh my gosh, now I get to tell you about the story about me watching E.T. as a 2-year-old, and peeking out the balcony at the old movie theater in my hometown, and it takes you back to a really warm place. And because he does that with every single interview, he starts to be like, there was someone else who was talking about Jurassic Park, and it gives you that place, and it gives your audience a touchstone.
Sure, yeah.
Too.
Sure.
Which is always good, especially if you're doing a podcast where you're going to have a theme, and you're going to be continually asking, if you're asking about geek subjects a lot, having a couple go-to questions is a very good idea. And then with trying to have a good casual conversation, one thing that I like to do, which is not always possible, especially if you have somebody that's like, he's got 20 minutes and 20 minutes. The pre-interview is a very good thing. Just don't hit record right away. even if you can't actually talk to them beforehand, like I have a friend who's doing a documentary right now, and when I was listening, I did transcripts for him too. When I was listening to his transcripts, he was like, when we talked on the phone last week, you were telling me this story about X. Can you walk me through that again? And like all this stuff. So he kind of knew some high points and things to hit that he was having in an off-the-record conversation. So he got that casual stuff, and because the person had already discussed it with him, they were more comfortable discussing it on the record as well. And so that's great. If you don't have a chance to talk to them ahead of time, because that isn't always possible, just have 5 minutes before you hit record, if you can. And just be like, all right, so, we're going to talk about this, and, like, how have you been doing? Did you have, like, the small talk stuff, some of it, but just to get them comfortable with you, and where they're in a mode where it's a conversation. With me, sometimes that doesn't always help too much, because the second you have that little red light right next to your head, people clam up a little bit. But I would do pre-interview sitting next to the camera while he was getting his focus, and he was messing with the lights all around, because they take forever for that. If you've ever met a cinematographer, they will take as long as you give them. And so I'm sitting here next to the camera already. We're already set up how we're going to be doing it. They're already looking at me instead of the camera. It's giving them that mood. Even if you only have 5 minutes to do that, it makes a world of difference. So
There's along with making podcasts, I'm a huge podcast listener. The most interesting opening to a podcast, in my opinion, is the Nerdist podcast, because Chris Harper from the Nerdist podcast, he starts recording at some point, and there's no beginning to the interview. The interview is just them like getting their drinks down, they're starting to talk, and they're just like shooting the shit a little bit, and it's always that the interviewee goes, "Oh, are we recording?" And he's like, "Yeah, no, we've been recording for like the last 10 minutes," and it's just like. There's just, they kind of ease in, and they're like, oh, and they just kind of keep on with their conversation. And that's I always kind of like that, because it puts you as the audience member into the room. Like, you feel like you've been kicking back on the couch with them for a while. Like you just returned from the bathroom, and they're in the middle of the conversation, you're just kind of catching up with it. And I think that, it's a hook. I feel like if too many people did it, it would be too hooky.
It would start to seem obvious.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that it would start also, there's a risk always with that, recording before people think you're recording or whatever. Probably most of the people, when they go on the Nerdist, they know exactly who he is, and they're used to him. But I know there was a moment in one of my interviews, it was a marathon interview. We were doing like a background anchor interview with this guy. It was 4 hours. We were sitting in his house. And at one point they were like, oh, well, we've got to like replace the battery or something. So he and I are chatting about something like very behind the scenes, very like personal gossip kind of stuff. And then when we get done, the cameraman's like, by the way, I recorded that if you want to use it. And I'm like, he had absolutely no idea who was on camera.
Yeah,
he
no.
would have said that if he knew. And so it was like, that's just the little.
You never want to be dishonest. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, like, the interview I did, I have no idea when she started recording. She may have said, but, I don't know what part she's going to edit in and what part she isn't. And that was perfectly fine, because it was a very comfortable conversation. But yeah, and then the other thing that I would say is, like I have right now, have your little list of things that you would like to hit. Have a pen or pencil, whichever, but it is not a script. Never do an interview off a list. My favorite, I wrote it down because I didn't want to get it wrong this time, because I tried to tell it at an intervention before. One of my friends put this joke, she says it's a journalism school joke, so I don't know where it actually comes from. But it's this reporter interviewing a company CEO, and he's like, when did you become the president of the company? A few months before I murdered my wife. And can you tell me about your newest project? And that's the danger. Like, you want to like have things flow.
That's the Jimmy Fallon approach to in-depth interviews.
So yeah, people can throw you curveballs, and they can have something come up, and maybe like somebody's gonna say something, or remind me of this thing that's on this page. You jump around, and then especially if you're doing one that an interview you're gonna edit later. There's always a moment where you can say, I just want to look over my questions for a second. And that gives them a second to regroup. You regroup. It's perfectly fine.
You gotta let things evolve and be organic, and if you get people comfortable, there was one we were doing where we were talking to an actor from a show, and we had a great conversation with her, and we were doing she had time, so we had like 30, 40 minutes, and we covered all the stuff, and we were kind of done, And the way we do it too, I'm based in Baltimore, and my producer and co-host is based in Portland, Oregon, and he handles all the Skype and the recording and all the production over there. So he was running the call, and once we were done, it was like, oh, we're done, and thanks so much and everything. And she said, you want to know what's going on next week's episode? And we thought she was just kidding. Then she proceeds to go and tell us tons of stuff that was really nice material that leads into other things. She just wanted to keep talking. And we were already, like, he was already tinkering, like, well, that will shut down. And I'm trying to text him over on the side saying, stop saying you're hanging up. She wants to keep talking. Let's keep talking. Let them lead you. If the person if there's limitations, like we only have 20 minutes, you always need to respect, particularly when you're dealing with a professional that you're interviewing. You always need to respect their time. They're at a premium, and that's another reason why, like in terms of prep, it's always nice to make sure you're very upfront and clear about all the parameters of the thing ahead of time.
How much time do you have?
How much time do you have? We'll call you this way. We'll talk for a few minutes, then we'll go into this, and all that. Make sure they're comfortable with all that. But if they say at some point, I got some more time, let's keep going. Use that, make it comfortable, keep talking, and let them lead you. And you can get some wonderful stuff that way. But at the same time, just always make sure you're respecting where their limits are. In fact, I also think a nice pre-interview kind of thing to do is to just flat out ask them, is there anything you don't want me to ask you while we're talking? Because, we can cut things later, but it makes it easier if they know up front, we're not interested in, I'm not trying to do an expose kind of thing. So if they don't want to deal with something, I don't want to bring it up. So we just do that. Let's just talk about what you want to talk about.
Yeah, that's one thing. There's definitely an interview technique that's like the grill gotcha interview or
Sure.
whatever. I don't know if any of us do those. I don't know if any of you guys are interested in doing those. If you are, On the Media just did a series called Bob's Grill that was some contentious interviews. Like, look up that podcast. He's got great technique. But yeah, like everything, because I was doing a documentary. I was there for a year. I was interviewing these guys once a month. And so you don't want to look at them and be like, so why'd your girlfriend break up with you?
Yeah.
What really happened there? Especially when you've already heard the gossip that she cheated on him or whatever. Like, yeah, okay, I might have gotten some good footage, but then when I went to interview him next month, he would have completely clammed up.
See, our podcast is, among other things, a comedy podcast. And when we did the Trek Off movie, a review of the movie that I think is maybe a legitimate criticism is that when I meet other podcasters or I meet fans, like that I'd go to a convention and meet fans, my whole thing would be like, I would shoot you a question, whatever you're a fan of, blah, 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 blah. And then my whole thing is I would throw out a ridiculously R-rated sex question. And you watch like people's faces like, and sometimes they come up with just like my favorite thing in there was when the person like seems to have known what I was going to say before I was going to say it, and I go, what would you do? Blah 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 blah, and without even breathing, they go this, and it's amazing. The few celebrity interviews that we got for the movie, I didn't do that so much, and a reviewer said, and it was legitimate, saying, see, for the movie that we thought we were getting, for the movie that you were doing with everybody who wasn't famous, when you got to somebody who was famous, clearly Justin was too scared to ask the funny questions of the people we'd actually want to know the answers from. So like, when I look back, I kind of wish that I had, gone up to those people and been like,
stuck with it.
And just stuck with it, and not been offensive to them. Don't go, why are you? But like, just like, if you could find a way to stay true, to not be starstruck, which, I've met enough celebrities in real life and on the show, but when there was a camera behind me and I knew I was interviewing them for something that was going to last forever, I maybe backed off a little more than I wanted to from what I was trying to do. So while you don't want to shock, I think you also want to stay true to what you're doing and not maybe be intimidated by one person versus another.
And it all depends on, what kind of tone you're going for and what your subject matter is. And like you said, you have comedy as a major basis of a lot of it. So that kind of confrontation and something that gets a laugh and that gets something humorous out of it, that's an important component. Someone doing a different kind of thing, it doesn't matter so much, so it wouldn't be missing if they didn't do it. So it just all depends.
And there's also, that's where the sort of pre-interview conversation comes in a little bit, is that, I was interviewing a wide spectrum of people, and I got to know who would have put up with something like that. and things like that. But that again is when I was doing a very long-term documentary following the same subjects for a year. It's a little harder in other contexts.
Well, certainly on the podcast, we're able to do that before we start. Go, hey, we tend to be like an R-rated podcast. Is it cool if we curse? Is it cool if we? And usually they're like, F yeah, and then it's good. You know, when you got someone for, you know, and sometimes when you shoot a documentary, someone goes, hey, I'll do an interview. You may have 45 seconds. That might be all that you ever get.
Right.
You know, if you're just meeting them, you know, for a second. And I don't want to be I don't want to be Borat. You know, I don't want to go out and be like shocking to the point where they're offended. But I also want it to be fun. So it's been a balance.
And one thing, if you're ever the subject of an interview, just to throw this out there, if you're on a podcast, listen to at least 2 episodes.
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent idea, actually.
So far, I have only been on ones that I already was a fan of, because they'll say like, oh, we're going to do an episode on such and such. If anybody has a story, and then, you know, I have a story about that.
I've been on podcasts where they're very hyper structured, like they always do certain segments in every show. You don't want to go into that cold. You want to know that, you know, you're going to roll with it and play along with whatever it is. They might have you on the whole episode and say, oh, we do this thing at the end, or we pick a thing. It's like, well, you're already prepared because you did your homework a little bit, you checked out what they're like, and it's a good thing to do that. Right?
I mean, if you're on a podcast, you can assume that you're being listened to by hundreds to thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
If you were doing a show in front of hundreds of thousands of people, you would maybe take 45 minutes to prepare for stepping out in front of hundreds of thousands of people, and so that there are hundreds and thousands of people. So like we have a great relationship with a show called now it's called Upper Pylon 2, which is about Deep Space Nine, and it used to be the Delta Quadrant about Voyager. Their show is incredibly structured.
Mm-hmm.
So what we would do is to set up, it made us all friends, and we would do their show and our show on the same night. So we would record their show super structured, then they would come over to our show, and we just wouldn't turn off the mics, and we would do our incredibly unstructured, whatever comes up, you know, and our show is very R-rated, their show is very not. So it's, you know, their show got to watch us struggle as hard as we could not to curse, and then Melissa on their show is God bless her, she does not like profanity, and so on she came to our show, we got to watch her blush. And both of those were an interesting thing we got to do, and it's created this nice dynamic. But you want to be a member of the show that you're on.
Right,
exactly. Mm-hmm. Not be, you know, so you that they never want to have you back.
Yeah. And then, just because I glanced down and I wanted to make sure that I said this, because it is my biggest pet peeve listening to interviews. Oh my gosh, it drives me crazy. Unless you are the important person interview, or you're doing like a roundtable conversation kind of thing, do not ask long questions. When I do transcripts, I put a time code mark every 20 to 30 seconds. If I have to interrupt and put a new time code in while the person's asking a question, they have been talking too long. And only ask one question at a time. There's a great scene, and I really wanted to find the YouTube of it, from one season of RuPaul's Drag Race, and I wish I could tell you exactly what episode it was. But the challenge was that all the queens had to get into their drag and interview a celebrity. I think it was Tori Spelling, but I can't remember. And they have this clip of this queen who goes on, and she's just like, what was it like growing up that way? And did you live in such and such? And blah, blah, blah. And question number 2, and question number 3, and question number 4. And by the time she's done, she's like, I don't even remember where you started. So you definitely ask one question at a time and make them short, because unless like the important interviewer example that I think is really cool is one I actually listened to this morning. It was Sonia Manzano from Maria from Sesame Street interviewing Sonia Sotomayor, the Supreme Court Justice. And that was fantastic because the two of them are amazing. They have this like similar history about growing up Puerto Rican in America and like going off to college and everything. That's great. Like they both contributed 50%. But if I was interviewing Sonia Sotomayor, nobody cares what I have to say. They just want to know maybe what question I asked, but they're there for the celebrity usually. Podcast is a little different. I'm sure
they're your listeners, so
right?
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, that's the dynamic we have with mine, where the whole idea is that I'm coming to it because I teach with Foursome Zombies, I've written the book, so it's like I have my expertise, but I still agree that to a certain extent when we're having the conversation, I can throw in if I have an observation or something, but if we're having a guest on, I'm deferring to the guests. They're the ones that are the special person that we want to listen to. I'm there all the time, so there's no point in me monopolizing things. And you do need to keep it short, keep turning it back to them so that they have the most participation. Does it still make sense? Yeah.
Well, what do you do when you get a dead guest? I mean, yeah,
It can be
boy.
difficult.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, I've never had a chance to tell this story before. I'll keep it quick, but I'm going to tell you a story I've never told before that's the worst thing that ever happened. It wasn't even a dead guest, it was a non-existent one. So we had an arrangement to talk to a very, from the point of view of if you're a zombie fan, a very famous actress from a very famous zombie movie. And it was awesome, and she also works on other projects that have nothing to do with that whatsoever. And I had offered her, come on, like I was telling you before about charity and other things. I said, come on, plug your thing. I'd be happy to talk to you about that for as long as you want. We'll also cover the things that people want to hear, but I'm happy to chat with you. And I told you we do it on Skype. So my producer, he and his wife are also tangentially involved in film production. His wife works on a lot of the Marvel movies and does a lot of suit fabrication and costume stuff and everything. So at one point, he was on the set of one of the X-Men movies, and he got to put on Hugh Jackman's Wolverine claws. They have like these hero prop claws. So his Skype avatar is a picture of him with his Wolverine claws doing that, okay? Everybody that sees it ever looks at that and goes, cool, Wolverine claws. And then he might throw in, yes, those are the real ones, actually. And he gets to tell us a little story. Fine. So we're set up to talk to her. We're looking forward to it. It's a nice get for the zombie world. And she comes on, and I start to tell her, so I know you have a short amount. And she's like, what is that? And she's seeing his avatar on her Skype. and he's oblivious. He can't, because nobody's ever responded to that, so we don't realize what she's responding to. And he said, are those knives? And so he was like, oh, those are Wolverine's claws. In fact, those are the price. He starts telling the story. And before he's finished the story, she's like, no, I can't. I can't.
Oh,
How about no? How about no?
Oh my God.
And she hung up.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is we recorded the whole thing. So there's an ethical element to this, I don't want to do that to her, even though she's crazy. But still in the back of my mind is always this idea, we could dump that into something at some point,
What's less
But,
what's less fun though is when, and I'm sure you've had this too, when someone's not that,
right.
but they're like, we did an interview with someone that I almost scrapped, but they were big enough that I didn't want to scrap.
Right.
So ask me a question. Ask me how I got into filming.
Well, how did you get started in filmmaking?
Well, when I was 12, I watched a movie.
It's serious. Go.
Was and it wasn't like where you could just edit out the pauses, where you could like set audition. It's like use audition,
Right.
where
Yeah.
you like just to get rid of the pauses because
Yep.
there. And I kid you not, I was trying to wrap up, trying to go. Well, we really respect your time. We really appreciate you came on. Why I could stay a while longer. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
It just hurt because I wanted to talk to this, and it was just
But that's an excellent point, though. Sometimes you do get a guest where it's like that you still want the person, but then you discover that they're not a good interview subject for whatever reason. There are famous actors that are terrible, like Robert De Niro is legendary for going on talk shows. They still want him because he's De Niro.
Harrison Ford used to be bad, but now he's
now
figured out what to do.
It's like a whole bunch of people sat him down a few years ago and said, you really need to start playing along with some of this stuff.
I was talking to one of my friends, and I won't name which one, but about an actor that he found to interview for one of his projects, and I was like, oh, that's a pretty big get. Like, that person has a lot of fans. And he was like, that was so painful.
Yeah.
It was like he was just dead. There was just nothing. Like he was just monotone.
Sure.
And when you listen to it, you can tell that they clipped out so much of it. And we had a couple. I got really lucky. Well, okay, it was a planned lucky moment. I was interviewing a whole bunch of gamers. You can imagine that there are some that are not that great on camera. But I very intentionally picked my subject as the team that I know pays for media consulting for their players. So they all have actual on-camera interview training. So I got really lucky with that. But one of the other things that I hear a lot of people run into, and I've run into this too, when you ask a question and the person doesn't actually answer that,
Oh my
and
gosh.
they're just, they go off on something, or they give you like a really terrible answer, and you can rephrase, but do it once. If the person is not giving you what you want after you've asked it again once, just give it up. You just have to let it go. You're just gonna have to, like, and if somebody's taking forever to answer the question, like, don't ask the follow-ups. Like, just sort of sit there with your list and be like, I'm gonna skip that one and that one.
Yeah, again, it's about being organic. You just gotta let it go.
You have to be
right.
really flexible. But yeah, I mean, I've listened to so many interviews, and there's one guy that I've had to transcribe a bunch of his interviews, and I don't know who it is. I have no idea. I don't even know what production company he works for because I'm a subcontractor. And I just want to reach through and shake him because he will rephrase 10 times. And I'm like, they don't understand what you mean, and they will never understand what you mean. They're not going to get it. You're never going to get what you want.
See, that's the thing, like we were talking about before, it's a little different. I've done quite a few documentaries now where I've been the interview subject and they're shooting stuff, and that's like a different dynamic because, and that's where like, I feel that I'm there to do a job for them. I'm there to provide them with nice, concise sound bites that cover the message that they want to convey in a given segment. Like whether it's zombies or Marvel or something, they'll say, you know, they'll eventually they get to know me. They know that they can just ask me. It's like, give me 3 minutes on why Iron Man was such a great way to start the series. Fine, and I do that. And then if they want you to say, oh, can you step back and do that a little different way? Fine. It's a performance. It's different than having a conversation, and you need to. And in that case, the repetition is fine because they're trying to get a moment they can cut in and use, and you want to be sure you get them, you know, that moment. If you're, you know, capable of doing that, if you hit somebody that doesn't have that ability, can't deliver, never going to be a good subject.
And that's the trick, is that one thing that I notice a lot, and this is something that I was taught in film school to do, and they might disagree with me, but I wholeheartedly reject this advice. If you're doing an answers-only interview, when you start the interview, you want to tell them, nobody's going to hear my voice, so you want to answer in complete sentences, maybe repeat the question back, something like that. If they don't do it, don't interrupt them. Don't force it. I have been on so many sets, and I've interviewed transcribed so many interviews where they're like, you know, the person starts talking like, oh, well, how did you get into film? Well, you know, when I was 12 years old, sorry, but could you say I got into film because that ruins all your flow, all of your chemistry. Like if you have somebody that's an accomplished interviewer that has media training, like somebody could probably interrupt me, and I'm like, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. Let me go back, it's fine. But so many people I've seen or listened to where it starts to get awkward real fast. And if you have somebody that's already on the edge of not being a great interview, you interrupt them more than once, it's going to keep getting worse because they start feeling, oh, I'm not giving them what they want. Because you have that thing where you're like, I'm here to do a job. I'm here to give them what they need. And I'm not doing it. I'm a bad interview. Because there's so many people, so many raw interviews where people are like, oh, no, sorry, I'm just rambling. I lost my train of thought. And it's like, no, we'll cut out that part. That's fine.
Well, like you said, that's the thing. Everybody I've ever dealt with has always done, I mean, I've known it after a certain point. Once you've done it, you know it. But everyone I've ever dealt with has always started with, can you just make sure that, you know, try to incorporate a version of what we're asking into make whatever you're doing a complete thought. And we're out of it. And it's like, okay, and you get used to that. And it's like, yeah, it's just another, you know, way of presenting information. But I mean, some people can't.
A lot of times in the actual edit, I don't use that first sentence anyway. Like, because that first sentence is them trying to get their mind around, and a lot of times when you tell them, like, I need you to actually, like, repeat my question or whatever, they'll be like, how did you get into film? Well, how did I get into film? And that's not usable either. And so, that's...
I got into film because...
and it's not their syntax, it doesn't really... And to people that have argued this with me, I always say ask better questions. You know, if you're asking a question that's not going to lead them into something that's a complete thought, think about how you're phrasing it. And listen back to your own interviews. It's painful. It's super painful. Trust me.
I love the way I sound.
Oh.
You guys have already figured that out.
I've gotten used to my own voice because I'm doing a podcast now that's not an interview podcast, it's a scripted podcast, but it's daily, so I listen to my voice a lot. And so I've gotten used to it, but like I'll go back and listen to my interviews and I'm just like, you develop verbal tics that you don't realize you have until you're listening back.
Oh
and
my gosh.
they finish and you're like, fantastic, and you know, my friend Kevin, you know, not to lambast him, but he goes, no doubt, after somebody answers almost every time. And it's just, with his it's fine because of the format, but you know, you'll start to hear like, oh, I remember that question went really bad, and when you listen back to it, you'll say, oh, it's because of how I phrased it, or it's because of how I introduced it, or you know, I had like a segue out of nowhere. They weren't really prepared for me to completely switch topic, and I wasn't trying to be shocking. You know, I wasn't trying to be like suddenly who does better sex, Kirk or Picard, you know.
You were talking
The
about
card, by the way. I know you think it's going to be Kirk.
Unequivocally.
I can tell you why,
Kirk is
but
selfish.
you're going to have to come see later. Sorry.
Picard's more giving.
That's right.
But anyway,
Better listener.
that's right. But you were talking about listening back to interviews and everything. It's like for years and years I used to write for magazines. I had to transcribe all the stuff that I did if they had a phone interview, whatever. It was the most painful thing I ever had to do was go back through tapes or whatever it is and transcribe. And for me, it wasn't just the clunkiness of transcription and having to go through that process, but for me it was just the idea that I couldn't stand listening or going through a conversation I'd already had.
Mm-hmm.
Like to me, it's like I've been through this conversation before. I always tried to find somebody else in the office who could take it instead of me. Can you transcribe this? Because it's like I know what's being said. I go, but you're right, and it is a beautiful idea strategically to use it as a way of keeping yourself true to a style that you don't let yourself fall into tics. It's an excellent idea because then you cycle through those kind of things. You might find that like in the last 6 months you seem to be using this word all the time. You know, shake it, go to something else, do something different, and it'll keep it fresh.
I'd like to, if I could, real quick, hit on a different style of interviewing, which is the podcast where you have people who are talking to each other who are exactly on the same level, a peer level podcast.
Mm-hmm. Like round table.
Yeah, well, just because we've talked a lot about like one person talking to small talking to big. I had it, and I just mostly because I had the story running around my head, and I want to share it. I did an interview with someone on a podcast a while back where they were super excited about a thing that was going on that they had been part of, and there was a plan for the show, and this person, for maybe it was late, I don't know what, but it was they would go and they would be really, really excited and they get to the end of their sentence and then they stop and go, oh, and then like if I was talking about going to the room, I walked into the room at intervention, I walked in, I got to see the mics, those mics, I saw those mics at Radio Shack once. Do you remember the Radio Shack? Everything you wanted to, and oh, by the way, about walking into the room, and after about 40 minutes went by, I we had to all stop, and I would go, we need to keep in mind that right now we're having a conversation as we would as friends, but we have a job to entertain the people who are listening, and I think that one must never forget that what you're doing is a show.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is meant to be entertaining, and the dinner table rules generally should if there are 3 people on a podcast, and I think we're doing pretty well at it, you should be talking about 33%. Right. And you can expand that 50% is almost okay. If you have gone a half hour and it's been you and everyone else been trying to jump in.
Yeah, and as somebody that I listen to a lot of podcasts, I subscribe to 40 podcasts right now.
Good.
Not all of them update that regularly, but and one of them's mine, so I don't know how much that counts. But there is one in particular, but there's a lot of them that do this, that I love this podcast. I love the people, and it's a round table, it's a peer-to-peer kind of conversation. I love what they're doing with it, but he doesn't cut people off ever, and they go on tangents, and he never ever edits. Mm-hmm. He hits record and he hits stop, and you hear the whole thing. And they've gotten where they've prepped up, they're almost 2 hours now. And that's, as somebody who listens to podcast creep, which one of my coworkers used this term and I love it, but decide how long your podcast is and don't be afraid to edit. I mean, I realize that like you're having kind of a roundtable thing, but if you listen to something like NPR has Pop Culture Happy Hour, like, that's that is a roundtable podcast being done by NPR itself. They edit. You can hear it. You can hear the little clips in it where they edit every once in a while. And they'll talk about it sometimes. They'll do like live segments, or they'll mention like, oh yeah, we had this conversation last week, but we cut that out because it got really weird. And you know, that's something, and especially if you're doing a peer-to-peer conversation, try maybe if you have a pre-interview time to tell them like, unless somebody's going on a really long time, try not to step on each other so that we can cut things out. But yeah, I mean, it is very much like, and it's hard sometimes to, you get somebody and that's when you maybe don't invite that friend back.
Well, yeah.
Well, the other thing, I'll just say that the other thing too is it goes to a technical issue too, which is overlap can also cause issues when you're trying to record and do a call.
Mhm.
So it's always good to make sure you
Yeah,
get into the
Skype doesn't
behavior.
always.
Yeah, get into the behavior,
Do it.
backing off, letting the other person complete the thought.
Yeah, I was just curious if you guys had any kind of management tips for podcasts. I'm part of a podcast and we have a live show, so audience call in, we still do that.
Unless you're brave.
Yes, we
Good
are.
for you,
brave.
though.
Yeah.
What would good way to engage your audience?
Oh my gosh, it's an insane podcast, but it's Geek Soul Brother and the 5 Nerdy Venoms is the podcast. But I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you kind of manage that flow? Because for us, our value added is that we'll have guests on, and it is like a dinner conversation with the guests, with our listeners. So we want to keep that going, but sometimes it'll get kind of Comic-Con-y, right, where you have to kind of shut it down with your faithful listeners, and that can be a little awkward, but.
Since my show's scripted, I can't say how I do it personally, but I will say, if you want to listen to a good example, Science Friday. It's another NPR podcast. I think about 20 of my 40 are NPR podcasts, to be honest. But they do a call-in segment. It's not celebrities, so you don't get as much of the celebrity gushing that, oh my gosh, convention panel questions with celebrities sometimes are so painful.
Yeah.
But, because they do not stick to that 30-second rule. But anyway, he does really well at sort of interrupting people politely and saying, like, and he also, because they do live broadcast on the radio, he also has to interrupt with station ID sometimes, or like, oh, we have to go to commercial. He's just very good at that, so I would say definitely listen to him as an example. But
No, yeah, I mean, we don't do anything that involves like live call or conversation, so we know going in, like we were talking about earlier, we know going in, like, well, we're going to try to talk to this person for only about a half an hour or 40 minutes, and even if it's just me and my co-host doing an episode together where we're talking about Walking Dead or something like that, we know we're shooting for like a certain time, and he edits, you know, he's vigorous about editing everything down, making sure the pacing is good, even if it's using clips or something else, the idea is to keep it nice and snappy and, you know, not feel like it's bloating, you know.
yeah, the last thing you want is for somebody to see your podcast downloading in their podcast addict or whatever and go, oh God.
Yeah. Right. And so we haven't had anything where we've had to manage a live situation. Exciting though that sounds.
We don't edit our show, and I think that's my own preference. In that the NPR thing that you're talking about, I can't listen to NPR. I have a real problem listening to NPR because I can feel the edits. I can feel it, and it doesn't feel. It feels stagey, and it feels cold. NPR almost always leaves me feeling cold. Because
I think that's fair for some of their
I
shows.
think
Some
I've never
not so much.
listened to it before, and in the last 6 months, I finally decided I'm going to find out what this whole NPR thing is about. And I've been listening to it in the car, and the thing that has struck me is one, that there's a clinical aspect to it. That I don't
clinical is
like.
better than
I
cold.
think
But
that
the other thing that I found, though, is that I found that so many of the people, including people that are apparently long-term career hosts, don't seem to be all that good at talking on audio. I mean, I can't, there's just so many ums and uhs and the one thing that has now become my #1 pet peeve is, and it's good for us for interviews, you're on the other end. Somebody asks you, so explain to us what's going on with the Wells Fargo situation. Yeah, so what's happening with that? What's the yeah, so thing? Why do you need to say that? Stop that. Go right into what you're doing. It's just noise. And I know that's like nervous tics. That's something that you need to consciously try to filter that out.
Sure.
But everybody's doing it. Yeah, so And it's like, I can't take that anymore.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
understand what you mean.
Well, I think the one caveat I should point out is that I don't actually listen to NPR on air. I only listen to a lot of their only podcast
Sure.
product. So something like Death, Sex, and Money.
Well, that's gonna be different, yeah.
I don't think that they actually air, and that's out of WNYC, which is also different. And,
Mhm.
because I listen to so many, I'm like, well, here's the taxonomy of NPR. But yeah, I definitely on like say Morning Edition or something like that, I can hear a lot of that, and I think I hate to skewer This American Life, but it is one of theirs that has a huge reputation that I think other shows are doing what they do better at this point because it has stagnated a little bit.
Well, it has the brand.
Yeah.
They have a towering brand, so.
But yeah, I mean, something like Death, Sex, and Money, Anna Sale is their regular host. She's one of the people that I hold up as like one of the best interviewers that I listen to. But as you can tell by the title of the podcast, she asks about very difficult subjects.
Yeah.
And she does it in a way that I think helps people open up.
You just mentioned something about it's like one of your favorite interviewers.
Mhm.
That's something that also I think is like a nice thing to bring up. Like people like you were just saying, one of the questions is ask the person who they go crazy for. Like another thing that'd be good for us is like who we think are the greatest interviewers. Because when you mention that, I always tell people if did anybody ever see Bob Costas when he used to have his late night show Later?
I feel like I've seen an episode or two.
It was like I think late 80s to 90s, but of course Bob Costas mainly sports commentating, but he had a late night show that was one of those ones that would be in the graveyard slot after the other late night show. It was a half-hour interview show, and it was mainly like actors, directors, whatever. I think it was one of the greatest interview shows I've ever seen. He was and it was all the things we're talking about. There was a comfort level, it was a conversation, it got to important points, he flowed with it, he was amazing. And I don't know if even stuff turns up on YouTube, they're kind of all, because it's NBC and they really, protect it. But I'd recommend people check out some of his old interviews, they're excellent examples of how to do it.
I love, of all things, and maybe it won't surprise me, Howard Stern.
Yeah.
In terms
Yeah.
of
He has a thing he does, and he does it very well.
and really, and if you don't want to do the crass thing, morning radio in general, or talk radio in general, where they can't cut, where it has to keep going,
Mhm.
where there are going to be pauses and uhs and yes-os, and it's building on the energy. It's all about creating the energy in the room so that it then goes up.
He does fantastic
Yeah.
interviews. Yeah.
Well, and I was going to say, were you saying you don't edit your show? I think that when you have a strong moderator at the core and somebody that's experienced with it and knows, well, these are the things that are bad to do, you can do that. I think that that's a very feasible thing to do. So,
We've been given the cut sign.
Yeah, we're
Yes.
getting the wrap up.
I think we are all probably easily accessible both online and in the dealer's room.
And Trek Off the Motion Picture, a documentary
Right.
about a podcast. What is tonight at 10? But it's very not safe for work, NC-17, so don't bring your kid. It's funny. Bye. How to